Gandhi's Hinduism and today's Hindutva ideology. So I'll start with an incident or two. So we're talking of the year 1922, almost 100 years ago. Gandhi has just been put into prison by the British, one of several imprisonments that he had. And within some days of his imprisonment, he is allowed visitors. And my father, who is 21 and a half at this time, and my father's future father-in-law, who has been spoken of, Raja Gopalachari, who was very active in the freedom movement, these two were allowed to visit prisoner Gandhi. So they discovered that Gandhi was sleeping on a flimsy blanket in a solitary cell. He was locked in at night. He was using some of his books as a pillow. He was denied newspapers and periodicals. So after this interview, Rajgopalachari wrote in Young India, which was the paper that Gandhi was editing, but now Rajgopalachari was editing because Gandhi was in prison. He wrote that India's rulers were unaware of their privilege of being custodians of a man greater than the Kaiser, greater than Napoleon, greater than the biggest prisoners of war. So Gandhi is referring to others the British had imprisoned, Kaiser, Napoleon. Now they've got Gandhi. So 2 years later, after Gandhi is released, this is what Gandhi says. I think he is aware that Rajgopalachari had written in Young India about Kaiser and Napoleon and so forth. So 2 years later, Gandhi writes in the paper Young India, "Man is nothing. Napoleon planned much and found himself a prisoner in St. Helena. The mighty Kaiser aimed at the crown of Europe and is reduced to a status of a private gentleman. God had so willed it, let us contemplate such examples and be humble." So this gives you an idea of the kind of reflection that Gandhi was capable of about himself and about history, about what men aim at. Now, Gandhi didn't aim at a throne, but he wanted to remove the British from the throne over India. He had big aims, and he wasn't able to achieve those as yet, so he wanted to be humble. And then, 2 years thereafter, Gandhi is again interested in Hindu-Muslim unity. He goes on a fast, one of the many fasts in his lifetime, for Hindu-Muslim reconciliation and unity. This was a 21-day fast. And on the 20th day of this fast, Gandhi made this remark that I've just quoted about Napoleon and Kaiser. And then he added that during these days of grace, privilege, and peace, I have hummed to myself a hymn we often sing at our ashram. This is a Hindu hymn, prayer song. Raghuvar tumko meri laaj. Some of you are perhaps aware of this. Raghuvar tumko meri laaj. So Raghuvar is kind of way of addressing the Almighty, and that my future, my shame, my fate is in your hands. So this hymn was written by Tulsi Das. Incidentally, this wonderful song that you all heard, sung across the world by 120 plus nations, written by a 15th century poet. We think of it as Gandhi's favorite song, but we forget the poet who wrote the song. And imagine, a poet writes a song in the 15th century, and the whole world is singing it today. But this other hymn that Gandhi was humming to himself in 1924, Raghuvar Tumko Meri Laaj, contains entreaties from, quote unquote, a sinner of old sinner, to one who protects the weak and removes the sin and misery of mankind. So this is the kind of religious attitude Gandhi is trying to cultivate. Incidentally, this amazing song by Tulsidas, the 16th century poet, who is the composer of the great epic, seen as a religious text by many Hindus, the Ramacharitmanas. And today, as you may know, has been this amazing dispute over mosque, temple, where Rama was supposed to be born. And but Tulsidas, in that particular hymn that I mentioned, Raghuvar Tumko Meri Laj, he uses words like Tum ho Garib Nawaz, you are the protector of the weak. Now, the reason I mention this, addressing the Almighty, Garib Nawaz is an Urdu phrase. It's a language the Muslims have brought to India. But Tulsidas refers to the Almighty as Garib Nawaz, using the Urdu phrase, protector of the weak. And he also says, Par utaro jahaz, take this ship across. But jahaz is not a Sanskrit name, not a Hindu name. It is an Urdu name. But Tulsidas has no problem using those words. So I wanted to mention this to illustrate one of three important characteristics I find of Gandhi as a Hindu. One, his favorite name for the Almighty is Ram, or Rama. In fact, Gandhi 3 or 4 times has spoken categorically as follows: my Rama is not someone with 2 arms and 2 legs. He's not a historical figure. Very important point. Gandhi's Rama, he says, is not a historical figure. And he says that the Almighty, the All-Compassionate, the All-Loving, is called Rama by some, Rahim by others, Kareem by others, Krishna, God, Jehovah, Allah. To him, it is a word, a sound for evoking the Almighty. And his favorite name for the Almighty is Rama, although sometimes use other names too. And as some of you may know, in his autobiography, he has spoken of how, as a child, he was a very fearful child, he was a cowardly child, he was afraid of the dark, he was afraid of snakes, afraid of ghosts, afraid of robbers. And he was married at a young age to Kasturba, but she was very brave and she had no fear of these things. This was a great embarrassment to him. But he recalled that when he was much younger, before he married, at the ripe age of 12 or 13, much before then, a maid in their home had told him, when you're afraid, just take the name of Rama and you'll be fine. He said it didn't work necessarily at that time, but I remembered it, and to the end of his life, he uttered the name Rama as his plea to God, a way of finding some assurance, some comfort, some security in this world. So the name of Rama is very significant in Gandhi's Hinduism. Then there is the Bhagavad-Gita that many of you have heard of, the Song of God as it's called, which is something that Gandhi was absolutely devoted to, attached to, inspired by, touched by. It's my mother, he would say. And he wrote a very interesting translation of the Gita and a commentary on it. As you may know, many Hindus feel that pilgrimages to some precious sacred places in the Himalayas are a great aid to one's spiritual journey. Gandhi never had the chance to visit many of these pilgrimage places, but in 1929, I think it was, he did make a visit to the Himalayas in a place called Kausani in today's Uttarakhand, UP, in this large state. And he wrote a remarkable introduction to his Gita translation and commentary in that, to many Hindus, sacred site. That also is worth looking at. I mention that because this was an exception in Gandhi's case. He was not a regular visitor to holy sites, but he did visit this place, and he composed a very significant introduction to his Gita there in that, to many Hindus, sacred spot. So there is Rama, there is Gita, and then there are these spiritual songs, like the Vaishnava Janato that we have heard, like this Raghuvar Tumko Meri Laj. And it's, some of you may be aware of this, but it's important to note that for millions and millions and millions and millions of Indians, Hindus, their understanding of Hinduism comes either from the great epics Ramayana and the Mahabharata, or from these songs, these bhajans as they're called, prayer songs. And these are heard, sung in 1,000 languages and dialects, in many homes, passed on from grandmothers and grandparents to children and grandchildren. And here in the United States, many Hindus have built temples which they visit regularly, and they have equivalents of Sunday classes and Sunday services. But that's not the case in India. In India, people may visit temples for this, that, or the other. But Hinduism, as they understand it, is imbibed through these prayer songs above all, and festivals. So Rama, Gita, and these prayer songs. Now, this is Gandhi's Hinduism, and there is reflection in it, there is humility in it. And as I mentioned in the earlier talk also, Gandhi feels that Hindus can learn much from religious texts of other religions, and vice versa. Those who today champion the Hindutva ideology have some different understandings. To them, Hinduism is more a matter of blood and soil. Let me explain. In Gandhi's case, from the Gita, from the name of Rama, from his spiritual songs, religious songs, he thinks of the Almighty who helps the humble citizen or human being who is in need. He's a succor, he's a S-U-C-C-O-U-R, for a strength, protector of vulnerable human beings. And he can inspire human beings to do unselfish things, courageous things, noble things. But to those who champion the Hindutva ideology, Hinduism is something connected with the physical land of India, the soil of India. So putting it again in an oversimplified manner, Gandhi's Hinduism is a matter of the soul, and Hinduism of these other folk is a matter of the soil of India. And so in this other conception of Hinduism, the physical features of the Indian geography loom very large. The Himalayas, the sacred rivers, the pilgrimage sites. And the epics are also, of course, very much India-based. So this is what happened in this part of India and that part of India. So there is very much a geographical, land-based, and birth-based notion of Hinduism. And So this is connected also with political understandings. For instance, there is this notion that India is the land of the Hindus. Not Hindus as necessarily people believing in X, Y, or Z, but Hindus physically inhabiting this tangible geographical space. So in many cases, the physical image of India is also worshipped. And Mother India is spoken of as a goddess that we must worship. Gandhi also loved physical India, although he tried very hard to make physical India cleaner than it sometimes is. But he was proud. He loved also a village, a town, a place in India. But he didn't necessarily feel that the soil of India is more sacred than other parts of the world. And to him, an understanding that puts the individual human soul in touch with the Almighty and in touch with fellow human beings was more important than a focus on the soil. Then there's one other point which is worth observing, and many of you must be aware of it, you who belong to the Interfaith Alliance and many of you are religious persons. You're well aware of this, that unlike, say, Christianity or Islam, which at least seem to demand some beliefs. There's no God but God, and Muhammad is his prophet. Judaism also says there's no God but God. And Christianity says, I believe in, or at least in some affirmations of Christianity, I believe in God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Ghost. Hinduism does not require any such affirmation of belief. You are a Hindu because you are born in a Hindu family. So from this angle, Hinduism seems to be more a matter of birth than of belief. Many a Hindu who would call himself or herself a Hindu would say, I don't believe in God. I'm a Hindu, but I don't believe in God. Or you may meet a Hindu who would say, I believe in 1,000 gods. I believe in 6 gods. I believe in no gods. But this difference in belief does not necessarily affect that person's Hinduness, being a Hindu. This too is, now mind you, many Muslims, many Christians, many Jews also are Muslims or Christians or Jews because they were born in particular families. It isn't as if every person who calls himself a Muslim or a Jew or a Christian necessarily has chosen and identified what they believe in and what they do not believe in. Many may have, many may not have. So religion is often a matter of birth, matter of circumstance for many people. But I think this distinction is particularly sharp in the case of Hinduism, where Hinduism is seen really more a matter of bloodline, than a matter of belief. Now, there was a very remarkable and very capable ideologue called Savarkar, Savarkar, who died, I think, in the 60s, was younger than Gandhi, lived, of course, for many years after Gandhi was killed. He was also charged with complicity in Gandhi's assassination, although there was lack of corroboration there was some evidence, but lack of corroboration, so he was acquitted. And another inquiry later on by a Justice Kapoor, many years thereafter, after Savarkar was dead, found that indeed Savarkar had a role in the assassination. But that is not necessarily so germane to this discussion. But since I want to convey to you the gist of Savarkar's theory, I mentioned this. So his theory is like this. He is the proponent of the Hindutva ideology. And it goes something like this, that you can only be a good Indian if you regard India as both your homeland and your holy land. You can be a good Indian only if you regard India as your homeland, but also your holy land. So which meant that Christians and Jews and Muslims could not be good Indians. Only Hindus could. And this was politically, of course, a very effective formulation. It meant, for instance, that Sikhs could be regarded as good Indians because their holy places are in India. And since many Indians regard Nepal as part of India anyway, wrongly, but they do, the Buddha is also an Indian. So a Buddhist can be a good Indian. A Jain can be a good Indian. But not a Muslim, not a Christian, not a Jew, not a Parsi, because their holy places are not in. But politically, this was a very effective way of giving an ideological reason for discriminating against Muslims and Christians in particular. They cannot be loyal Indians. They will betray you if they're in the army or the police or whatever. You cannot trust a Muslim or a Christian. So it was politically quite effective. Now there is an irony here, and in fact a complication here, because a great many champions of Hindutva are now living in the United States. Indian Americans, many of them holding American passports. But India is their holy land. So, can they be good Americans? Not by Savarkar's definition. Hindutva was politically very effective some decades ago, when most Indians were confined to the physical boundaries of India. But not now. If they're in Canada and the United States, Australia, they cannot be loyal to those countries. If they are good Hindus, they cannot be. So these are ironies. Now, one other difference between Gandhi's Hinduism and the Hinduism of the Hindutva movement is that Gandhi very often prayed to the Almighty. Sometimes he asked the people of India to pray. You never hear champions of Hindutva ever asking for prayer. They don't need God. We Hindus are strong. We are tough. We will admit no nonsense from others. First the Muslims oppressed us, then the British oppressed us, then Gandhi came along and gave this misleading picture of Hinduism, confused all of us. His non-violence weakened us. He couldn't prevent partition. So many Hindus were killed. Now we have real Hinduism. There is no need for the Almighty, either for the Almighty or for the All-Loving or the All-Compassionate. So strength is within the Hindus as defined by blood and soil. Whereas Gandhi again and again and again is praying. Now, I mentioned earlier Gandhi's insistence that India was a land for all. And his success, along with that of his colleagues, that the Indian Constitution created not long after India became independent, in unequivocal terms, starting with we the people, committed India to equality, liberty, fraternity, dignity for everyone without exception. No race, no racial discrimination. Not that India had large numbers of white people or African people, but yet the India's constitution says that you cannot discriminate against anyone on the ground of race or religion or gender or class or caste. Absolute equality. So now the Hindutva forces, political parties, have successfully sold the line to many Indians, many Hindus, that independent India in the last 70 plus years has appeased the Muslims to the detriment of the great Hindu majority. This is a charge widely believed, but very hard to establish. Because the fact is that the 14% Muslim population of India has very poor representation, whether in legislatures, parliament, in the judiciary, in the army, in the police. When this point is mentioned, the Hindutva votaries say, oh, but yes, this may be true, but it's all the fault of the Muslims because they have this horrible educational system. They don't send their children to good schools. They send their children to madrasas. It's their fault. Nothing can be done about it. But that is a very limited and a very incomplete and, in fact, not a satisfactory explanation at all. It is a fact that partly because of the violence of partition time, and many Hindus and Sikhs did face great injuries at Muslim hands. It's also a fact, although sometimes forgotten, that many Muslims also suffered very great injuries, death at Hindu and Sikh hands at that time. In Pakistan, as I mentioned earlier, one kind of history is taught. In India, another kind of history has been taught. So the notion that the Muslim is a dangerous person has not been very hard for people to sell. And it is now widely believed in many parts of India. And great many social wrongs are also explained away by many Hindus as the result of needing to protect people from the Muslims. So I need not go into great detail there, but there has been a background for the success of this ideology. And the fact that earlier governments that believed in liberty, equality, tolerance, failed to provide a really effective government for 60, 70 years, and poverty could not be eliminated, and corruption could not be removed. And there were other serious faults, failures. And the Hindutva champions have said that it is really the notion of equality, the notion that we should be tolerant, that is been responsible for India's decline. And if only India can become a truly Hindu nation and honor the Hindu blood and honor the Indian soil and deal with unreliable people as they should be dealt with, then India will indeed make very great success. And so this argument has electorally been quite effective. And in more recent months and years, Prime Minister Modi, who was earlier Chief Minister of Gujarat State 3 times, and during one of his terms there, terrible carnage occurred in the year 2002 against Muslims. And he has never acknowledged that carnage or apologized for it. But he was elected Prime Minister of India first in 2014, and again 2019 he was re-elected for another 5-year term. And in recent years and months, there have been some very sad occurrences that some of you have heard of, including, believe it or not, in this day and age, lynching of people. So that has happened. And other cases of persecution and injustice and discrimination. And last night I mentioned these new laws relating to citizenship, which make legal discrimination a acceptable thing in India. And the Kashmir question is also partly connected to this. Now, it should be recognized, and I think there should be no hesitation in recognizing this, that what many extremists and militants and terrorists have done in the name of Islam in many parts of the world has also played a significant part in creating this mood. Absolutely no doubt about it. It also has to be acknowledged that many acts of terrorism emanating from Pakistan have taken place in India and have also contributed to this present mood. But we all know that horrible violent acts, and sometimes terroristic acts, have taken place in many parts of the world, and many of them are not connected to Islam, although many of them are connected, or at least have been waged in the name of Islam. So this is where we are at in India today. And in the last 9 or 10 weeks, there's been an amazing burst of protests and demonstrations against inequality, against discrimination, led by young people, led by women. And so they give a good deal of encouragement. So maybe I will stop here, and perhaps we can have a good discussion. Yes, sir.
Following independence, the Congress Party was the dominant party in India. Can you help us understand why in recent years there has been sort of the demise of the Congress Party?
Well, that's a very important question. And I think one answer is that the Congress Party failed to meet the expectations of the Indian people in significant ways. Whether it is education, whether it is healthcare, whether it is the economy, what was achieved fell short by what was expected. Corruption was another great issue. So the Congress Party and its governments, whether at the federal level or at the state level, disappointed a great many sections of the Indian people. And that disappointment has greatly fueled the rise of the present government, political party that rules many states and central government. So this is a very broad and general answer. Another charge that has been leveled, and it perhaps has some basis, there has been some resentment that the family of Jawaharlal Nehru, who was Prime Minister for 17 years, that family has occupied positions of influence for a very long time. Nehru was Prime Minister for 17 years. His daughter, Indira Gandhi, didn't immediately succeed Nehru, but became Prime Minister not long thereafter, not long after Nehru's death, and was in power herself for 17 years. And then her son, Rajiv Gandhi, became Prime Minister for some years. So this too was used, often successfully, as an argument that the Congress Party was really the rule by one family kind of argument. And that argument was accepted by quite a few people. But the decline of Congress and the failure of Congress requires about 16 consecutive sessions. So what else?
Yes, would you please say a little more about the role of the Sikh community in India, both in the partition, in 1947, but also in the turmoil that's going on now? How do they fit into all of that?
That's a very important question. And here, allow me to say that what the Sikh community has been able to achieve in California, in other parts of the US, and in parts of Canada is simply fantastic. And I honor that. And this also gives me the chance, by the way, to advertise a book of mine. One of the books that I wrote not very long time ago is called Punjab, A History from Aurangzeb to Mountbatten. Aurangzeb was the last major Mughal emperor who died in the year 1707. Punjab was partitioned along with India in the year 1947 under Mountbatten. And great killings took place in Punjab. I wanted to find out more about these killings and find out the historical background of these killings, not just the background of the immediately preceding years, but a longer-term background. So from the death of Aurangzeb, what happened in Punjab, to the partition of India and Punjab in 1947 is the story of this book, which also describes, of course, the rise of the Sikh kingdom first, Ranjit Singh's kingdom in Punjab, and even before that, some Sikh soldiers and leaders controlled Punjab. Now, this was remarkable because Punjab, from about the 16th century onwards, if you take undivided Punjab together, much of it is Pakistan today, much of it is in India today. If you take that whole area together, that area had a Muslim majority. The second largest group were the Hindus, and the Sikhs were the third largest group. So the smallest of the three groups acquired power in Punjab after the Mughal power withdrew. As the Mughal power retreated, power went not to local Punjabi Muslims or to local Punjabi Hindus, but to the Sikhs. And the emergence of Sikh power in Punjab is a theme of my book, among other things. And since I'm already on my advertising trip, let me mention that the Guru Nanak Dev University in Amritsar gave me an honorary D.Lit for my Punjab history. And if there are anyone connected here with Punjab, I would be absolutely delighted if you could read that book. And by the grace of the Almighty, who may be described in many different names, this humble book of mine has been accepted by Sikhs and Hindus and Muslims on both sides of the border. And it describes how also the British used divide and rule, how the British encouraged the Muslims of Punjab, the Sikhs of Punjab, the Hindus of Punjab to have very close relations with them, but no relations with their Hindu or Sikh or Muslim neighbors. Here I may also mention that in the last few months, when many Muslims in India have faced persecution, many Muslims in Kashmir have faced difficulties, those who have come to the aid of the Muslims have been the Sikhs, in an amazing way. And those of you who know the history of the relationship between the Sikhs and the Mughal rulers, and the persecution faced by the Sikh community, and the killings of the Sikh gurus, if you know that history, and then you see that today the Sikhs are championing India-Pakistan friendship, they are championing human rights for the Muslims of India and in Kashmir, I would say it is a fantastic tribute to Guru Nanak Dev Sahib and all his followers. So that is why I'm so delighted that my talk here has coincided with the preparations for observing the great anniversary related to Guru Nanak Dev. So thank you, sir, for that question. Yes.
There. So I cover the Indian American diaspora all over the country, and there are so many different dynamics that have evolved over time. We're seeing many more Indian Americans get involved in politics. Some people wear their faith on their sleeve. Some folks choose to be much more secular in their approach. And I'm seeing this invective in whether it's what's going on in India, what's going on here in the United States. And I wanted to get your thoughts on this transition we have, where I see there are many more people that are trying to see India rise and try to see India grow and empowered. I mean, President Trump is on the way to India tomorrow, and he's going to be spending a couple of days forging an alliance with India and Prime Minister Modi. And part of that is they look at India as an opportunity to fend off the growth of China. And these are two democracies that ostensibly should naturally work together, but some people are offended by the Trump-Modi alliance, which has become strong. And then there's folks, in the Muslim community, in the Sikh community, that are concerned, obviously, about what's going on in India. And some of that spreads politically here in America as well. And so we have these divides that I notice politically in this Central Valley. I notice it in the Bay Area. I notice it in other parts of the country. And I want to get your thoughts on, the evolution here of the Indian American community, because as someone who grew up as a Punjabi Hindu in a very inclusive family, where my father actually was the first Indian to start an Indian restaurant in California. And so that became like a community center in the Bay Area. And he even started something called the Pakistan-India Friendship Society, which didn't last too long, unfortunately. And I was just a kid when all this was going on. And so the first generation, that first and second generation crop of Indian Americans seemed to be very inclusive, seemed to want to unite everyone regardless of faith and caste and creed. But I see more and more folks trying to identify themselves as Hindu, Sikh, Muslim, leaving their Indian identity behind and identifying through faith and through their politics. And I wanted to see what you thought about this certain growth and this rise and that kind of identification.
Well, thanks for a very important question and articulated in this very clear way. I appreciate that. So let me try and give my response. It is remarkable how the Indian diaspora has grown both in numbers and in influence in the United States, in Canada, in many other parts of the world. And allow me also to include another great reality of our modern world, which is the spread of the Chinese diaspora also. And I sometimes say to myself something like this. There was a time when European powers were very influential in the world. They had empires, not just Britain, not just France, there was Belgium, there was even Denmark, there was Holland, Spain, Portugal, colonies around the world. Then there was a time, and it continues, that the United States has tremendous influence all across the world. But at no time of the European period of influence or of the American period of influence did so many, in physical numbers, Europeans or Americans live all over the world as the Chinese and the Indians live today all over the world. Reflect upon it. Millions and millions and millions of people of Chinese origin, Indian origin are all over the world. The Indian footprint in America and the rest of the world is very large. So is the Chinese footprint. And the great question to ask is, what are these millions of Indians and millions of Chinese going to do for the world? What is their biggest role? What is the biggest role of the Indian diaspora in California and in the United States? Is it to take part in divisive politics? Or is it to demonstrate the unity and the equality of humanity as a whole? You say that instead of maybe Sikh or Hindu or Muslim or Christian or whatever, let us be good Indians. I would say even that's not good enough. Even being good Americans is not good enough. Should we not demonstrate that really human beings are at bottom absolutely the same, whatever they are? And so that is the role of the Indian diaspora. Much bigger than supporting this party or that party or Trump or whatever, or defeating him. The future of humanity is at stake. We can't claim to be better than somebody else barely because of some religion or some race, so place of origin. We're human beings, and of course America has this incredible history of letting everybody come and be a proud American. And as I mentioned last night, India and the United States are two of the few countries in the world which have enormous diversity and which say that our country is not founded on race or religion or birth, but on the idea of equality, liberty, respect, fraternity. So let Indians reflect on their true purpose of being in the United States. It's not just to make lots of money, not just to be better than the Pakistanis. That's a very limited aim. Oh, today Trump has made a negative statement against Pakistan. Hooray! That's not good enough. India is needed as a counterweight to China. Hooray! That's not good enough. When America faces these enormous challenges today of polarization, divisiveness, let Indians emerge as uniters, reconcilers, who will not believe in polarization, discrimination, separation, exclusion. Indians can, at the drop of a hat, recite wonderful slogans about how great Indian thought is. But let the thought about the world being a family be demonstrated in reality. In reality. That is the task before brilliant, gifted, talented Indians. You know, I'm amazed when I turn on the television set in America. It is also often an Indian explaining America to Americans. Whether it is the weather, whether it's the stock market, whether it is healthcare, whether it is a scientific discovery. It is wonderful. But the Indian who is here is a representative of humanity as a whole. He or she is a representative of Mexicans, Latin Americans, Native Americans, the Middle East. Both the Arab Middle East the Jewish Middle East, the Turkish Middle East, Persian Middle East? Why not? So thank you for your very important question. And again, let me say, my time is virtually over. Your time is just starting. Your dad started a restaurant. But you and your team and those who listen to your programs, I invite these amazing, enterprising people of Indian origin now in California, please discover your real role. Don't underestimate it. You are friends to everybody, to the African Americans, to the Latin Americans, Latinos, Latinas, the Native Americans, and the white Americans. They're not your enemies either. They're your allies, and together demonstrate something. The challenges are enormous, the opportunities are amazing, and you certainly have in the United States the chance to freely express your views, to meet anybody you want to meet, to create solidarity, and to fight for human rights across the world. Don't give up on the fight for human rights and freedoms across the world, including in India. Raise your voice for human rights in India. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Gandhi, again. So we are here, the Interfaith Alliance, and a lot of good work is done by interfaith communities here. But how I see Gandhi as the progenitor of interfaith framework. So I have two short questions. Is there any serious work, interfaith work has been done in India? And the second is, what can we learn from Gandhi? In a very, you have done a lot of studies, and I have just begun studying on that topic. What can we really specifically learn? How he did the prayer meetings, how did he ask us to study the scriptures of other traditions? And you gave some pointers already, but maybe we can really go into the interfaith question. Thank you.
So on your first question about the scale or nature of interfaith activities in India today, I would say that there's a variety of interfaith partnerships in different parts of India. And based on common issues, common needs, whether it's employment, whether it's farmers' distress, whether it's the environmental challenge, whether it is the great challenge to our educational system in the universities. So many alliances are taking place. Most of these are local-based alliances. So are there any common truths we can learn from these alliances? So from my understanding, which is quite limited, I find that when another group is especially vulnerable or is especially ill-treated, whether it's by the government or by anybody else, then if I support that other group, that makes a tremendous impact. So again, to repeat, what the Sikhs, in Kashmir, what happened in recent months that you're aware of, and many Kashmiris in different parts of India were in difficulty. Many of the Sikh men and women went to the support of these Kashmiri students. And that has created more interfaith trust and solidarity than almost anything else. Similarly, in these demonstrators on the citizenship laws, people of different communities have come together. So very often the alliances are issue-based, that there is a common struggle that has to be waged and people of different backgrounds must come together. So it's not just developing interfaith understanding. The problems in India that have, or say even going back to the 47 killings, not because Hindus did not know enough about Islam or Muslims did not know enough about Hindus. Those were not the real reasons. The real reason was that some people deliberately spread hatred and poison and made weapons available for fighting. And then it became out of control. So I'm all for more knowledge about each other's religions. But I'm even more strongly in favor of real partnership with people of different backgrounds, different religions, for common goals which affect all of us. These are general statements, but I'm glad again that you asked this question. And as I mentioned earlier, in a somewhat different context, California does present a tremendous challenge to all of us to show solidarity among races, among religious groups. So thank you. And I look forward to what you guys are going to do here. Yes, ma'am.
So, you just said that your time is over and mine is over. How can we educate these younger generations, like high school students and college students, about interfaith?
I was hoping that you were going to say that your time and my time is not over. When you started, I said, hey, this person is going to encourage me. But you are underlining my... Okay. No, without conceding that the time is really over, you know, one of the remarks which Gandhi didn't quite say it, but he could have said it, that I want to live as if I will die tomorrow. I want to learn as if I'll live forever. So you and I, we will continue to live, whether it is for learn, whether it is for the next 6 months or 6 years or 20 years or whatever. But how to enlist the younger people?
Where is that? The Gandhi's quote, number 11, that you just mentioned.
Yes. Thank you. Live as if you were to die tomorrow, learn as if you were to live forever. So, I think the young are doing pretty well, actually. And they have their own view of looking at things. They are more aware of certain things that are likely to happen than we are. But I think we can, if we can demonstrate in our own actions with people of our age, maybe, or that we listen to each other, that we get to know each other. I think listening is to repeat a point I may have made once or twice, is the absolute key. And again, if I may speak generalizing, my daughter always says, don't generalize. But I sometimes do it, and sometimes there may be truth in it. We Indians, we talk too much. We are great talkers, we're not good listeners. If only we listen to one another, if we listen to our children and grandchildren, and encourage them to listen and to read. You know, reading is another form of listening. As I said earlier, we think that knowledge will come through osmosis. We get knowledge now through WhatsApp. But if we get our knowledge through real sensitive listening, real careful, solid reading, learn about those who are living close to us, those who share our nation with us, those who share our world with us, that's the way to go.